The National Insurance Scheme is back in the spotlight as government puts measures in place to ensure the fund is not depleted by 2036 based on current projections. The proposed plan involves raising the retirement age and increasing the required number of contributions to be eligible for pension. These changes have been widely questioned despite months of consultations. The National Insurance and Social Security Amendment Bill was debated in the lower house of Parliament on Friday, July 28th, and scheduled for debate in the Senate on August 2nd. However, in the upper house, Leader of Government Business Senator Lisa Cummings, after introducing the bill, moved that the session be postponed. In this episode of In the Know, Senator Rawdon Adams, Deputy Chair of the NIS Board, shares why the revitalization of the fund is needed, the consequences of not acting now, and some of the primary measures now in place to safeguard this critical aspect of Barbados' social safety net. I'm Krystal Hoyte, and this is In the Know. Senator Adams, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
Lots of concerns coming out of recent announcements on the National Insurance Scheme. Let's start at the beginning. What is the current situation of the NIS?
Well, the current situation, following the release last year of the 17th Actuarial Report, is that a core group was convened. It did a wide set of consultations with a working group and advisory group as to how we would revitalize the scheme which was facing depletion of its fund by 2036. And once that happened, an increase in the overall cost of the scheme that would have had to have been passed on to contributors in the absence of any money in the fund. So those consultations concluded. A core group comprising quite a few well-known people with expertise in the area submitted a report first to the NIS board, and from then it went to the cabinet. And of course, the minister last week announced a couple of the measures in the legislation, but there are a few others to go along with that. And overall, the projections now are that the fund, instead of being depleted in 2036, which is the best estimate is now 2052. And the measures we've taken will keep the overall cost of the fund where it actually is in that range. And when 2050 rolls around, it will actually drive down the overall cost of the fund. And this was done looking very carefully at the socio-economic benefits that we want the NIS to retain, most notably perhaps the strength of the minimum pension guarantee. And we're trying to balance benefit adequacy against affordability, against the overall sustainability of the system itself. So now we're at the stage where we have to try and communicate what we've done in a way that people understand the trade-offs that were made, the multiple scenarios that were run, why we settled on this one, and I think reassure and communicate, perhaps, especially in light of the way the debate has begun so far.
In a previous interview with the actuary, the age of 72 was on the table to ensure that the fund would be viable. And so the primary question is 68 enough? Or will we be back here needing to make adjustments in another 5, 7, 10 years?
Well, I hope we're not back here in 5, 7, or 10 years. I think when you first look at our situation, aging society, with the preponderance of people who are going into retirement, his intuition was that the age of retirement probably would have to be touched. But having gone through the process, it's a mix of measures that we put in place. I think 72 would, even though quite a few countries are aging, I know, for example, that the Dutch are projecting an age of retirement of 70 by the year 2040, and there are a host of others also that have linked life expectancy to the age of retirement. We don't think that was what we needed once we got into the data and the modeling. We know that we did have to do a gentle transition of 1 year to 68 over 11 years, just because the numbers, the ranks of the retirees are swelling, and at the same time, the contributor numbers are shrinking. So it had to be part of the answer. The broader piece of the question, will we be back here in 5 to 7 years? The assumptions we've made are very reasonable assumptions. And if those change, I think it is more likely if we come back, it might be to soften some of these measures the assumptions that we've been making, for example, on the economy drives jobs, the creation of jobs, and through that, increases in contributions. But we know in the last 15 years, we've had 10 years where growth was negative. And we know that if you average out the last 15 years, including the COVID years, we've had less than half of 1% growth on average. If you take out the COVID years, it's still less than 1%. When the scheme was originally conceived in 1967, in that decade, the average growth was about 6.8% a year. We had a much younger country, and we were booming. The total fertility rate also, which is another way of saying where our contributors are coming from, was well over 2. I think it was about 3.6. All those things have changed today. So we had to evolve our system to match our circumstances. That's just the reality of it.
The increase in pensionable age from 67 to 68 is just one of the measures being implemented. What are some of the others?
Yes, I can tell you, I'll go through the main ones. The detail of the measures and indeed much of the background to the report can be found on the NIS's website. There's a report there on the revitalization measures. So I will cover the main points, but the detail is in there. So we've talked about, on the cost side, we've talked about increasing the age. That is one. We've also increased the length of time it takes to qualify for a minimum pension. It used to be 10 years or about 500 weeks. Now it's 750 weeks. This is a pretty reasonable measure. We still are one of very few countries that qualify our citizens for a full minimum pension as fast as that. There are only 6 others you can see in the OECD have a database where you can look at these things. There are only 6 other countries that do it that fast. Mostly mature economies tend to qualify people for the full pension after about 29 years. So in making sure that we haven't been excessive in that increase in qualification, we've still kept the promise, the heart of our system, a generous minimum pension, intact. But we have made that change. We've also reduced the speed at which you can acquire your rights to a pension, such that before revitalization, 36 years of working would have got you to your full rights, which is 60% replacement rate against the insurable ceiling amount. Now that is about 40 years. Again, someone starting work at 20 can expect to work 40 years. If they are intermittent or a seasonal worker, we still have that guarantee of the minimum pension in place. 15 years work, we calculate your formula. If your formula is giving you a pension less than the minimum, you're bumped up to the minimum. So that promise, that backstop of people who maybe not be able to get a full 40 years in or anything approaching that, they still get this minimum pension, which, by the way, is about 125% of what the IDB, when they came here, called our poverty line. That level tells you a minimum amount of money required to keep a roof over your head and put food on the table. And that is really the goal of the minimum pension, to make sure that we don't have an old, vulnerable population living in financial distress. We're trying to make sure that this promise of financial dignity in retirement is maintained for those on low incomes. So that covered the qualification piece. In terms of the income side, we have not touched the contribution rate for reasons I touched on before. We have an increase in the number of retirees being financed by an ever decreasing number of contributors. If you increase the contribution rate on those who are paying at the moment, you start to get into a level of unaffordability. Already our rate is relatively high. It's not the highest, but it's above, I would say it's slightly above average, but that's a fairly tight dispersal around that average when you look around the world. But we didn't feel that we could increase the contribution rate given those circumstances. I just want to give you a sense, first of all, of the scale of that. I'll give you a couple of pieces of hard data. You know, the projections of the actuary in his actuarial report are showing that in the mid-2030s, that deficit, because of this growth in retirees and shrinking of the contributors, is going to run at around $500 million a year. And it doubles 10 years after that, so it's about $1 billion. And then 10 years after that, it's getting into $1.62 billion. These are enormous numbers, and it's all coming from the retiree ranks mainly, I should say, a vast majority, in combination with a base that's trying to finance it that's shrinking. You know, that base just can't do it by itself. So here's I'll make it real with some hard data. So in 2000, all the people who retired in the year 2000, at that time age 65, right, 52% of them are still drawing their pension today at age 87 or age 88 or thereabouts. You know, so not only are those ranks getting larger, people are living a lot longer than we originally forecast. And over the same period of time, the contributive base has shrunk from approximately 119,000 people to 105,500 people. If that continues, it doesn't matter how many increases you put on the contributive base, it can never cover the growth on the pension side, on the benefit side. And at some point, you'll reach a rate that people will just stop participating. You'll say, I can't afford that. You know, the minimum pension is great, the benefits are great, but I can't afford paying 27, 28, 29%, which is what the actuary forecasts if we didn't have the fund, if the fund was fully depleted. So you have to do something that really attacks and deals with the swelling of the ranks in the retirees, along with a combination of other measures that deliver and maintain the system as affordable, as adequate, and above all, maybe as sustainable.
When we return, we're looking at additional measures implemented to revitalize the national insurance scheme. Stay with us.
One of the most notable measures that we're taking, especially if you're someone who has an investment background, concerns the agreement that's been reached with the Central Bank of Barbados, granted by the governor, the new governor, Dr. Kevin Greenidge, that allows the NIS access to $40 million of cash a year to invest abroad. And this will allow the NIS to diversify its portfolio in a way that was previously not possible for different reasons. But this agreement is planned to be a rolling agreement subject to prevailing macroeconomic conditions. But if the fund is successful in getting $40 million a year for just 2 economic cycles, and that might be 12, 15 years down the road, it would allow the fund up to 15 percentage points of diversification in its portfolio. So in concrete terms, what does that mean? Today, the fund has about 67% of its investments in government securities and government bonds. That's more than it wants. Its own guidelines put down about 57%. So if you had 15 points of freedom to change that, you could put it into equities, real estate, alternative investments, hold more cash than you otherwise might be able to, and so on. So for the portfolio side, this is really a watershed, a huge innovation for them. In our projections, we are hoping to increase the overall yield on the portfolio from 4.5% to 5% to about 6%. Now, the fact that you've opened up a whole new universe of things to invest in outside of Barbados hopefully makes that possible. It does depend on how much liquidity you need and so on. But this grants the portfolio managers, and the ones managing this would be most likely be US-based and professionals, greater freedom to deliver a 6% return, which is really what we're after. And of course, in terms of overall diversification, we would be moving from a position today of about 81% of our assets all in Barbados to one which would reduce that very significantly. Now, that is important because many people intuitively think, well, we have to invest in Barbados, develop the economy, develop what we can. But this is a superannuation fund. It's designed to take care of people's pensions, and that has to be the primary focus. And even if you reduce the overall allocation from Barbados to from 80 to 50 to even 30%, you're still putting in a very significant chunk of money into the country to do some development. But if you don't do that and you continue to maintain a very high rate of allocation to the country, you're exposing the fund, the backing fund, to the very same factors the scheme is exposed to. That is to say, the Barbados economy. Every contributor, every company in this country is 100% exposed to the Barbados economy. If you want to hedge against that, with your fund, you don't go and invest 80% in the same economy. You have to diversify. This is a way, one of the analogies I'm using is a chair with one leg. That's what we have at the moment, a one-legged chair. Over time, we diversify abroad into other asset classes. You add a second leg, a third leg, a fourth leg, and then at the end of it, you've got a solid foundation that your portfolio is sitting on. So the fact that the governor has made this agreement, there are some caveats, but the fact that it's in there is very, very good news for the investment part of the overall portfolio.
We've dealt with investment. What about compliance?
Krystal, one of the additional measures is compliance. There's great willpower, I think, at board and ministerial level to deliver more on compliance. We know that there is money there. There's a difference between the schedules that are submitted by employers and the amount of cash that's collected. Sometimes you have to use all means at your disposal. That may start with a conversation, that may end with an agreement on paying your compliance over a certain period of time, or it might actually end up in a legal procedure where you have to actually pursue people to get the money. It all depends on the context. We would like to press down on that considerably harder than has been the case in the past. I know the staff at the NIS also feel the same. So that actually is one of the assumptions we're making in our projections, that there will be an improvement. We've baked in about a 10% improvement. And that's a very important contributor to what we're going to achieve down the road. So it's essential we have the resources to pursue that and to actually make it happen.
Speaking of compliance, a primary concern has always been a lack of contributions by those that are self-employed. What's being done to better incorporate them?
Well, it's a great question, because anybody who's over 16, resident in Barbados and self-employed, under the regulations to the Act, has to be paying in NIS contributions. There are very good reasons for that. You get a great package of protection, and plus, eventually, at some point, you get access to the guaranteed minimum pension. At the moment, however, I don't think that is widely appreciated. We estimate that less than 15% of the self-employed are actually contributing into the fund. Partly, this is a function of the cost. People look at the cost, but not the benefit. But also because paying in is actually not very, very convenient. You have to go down to the NIS building in person, fill out a form, and this is every quarter. Fill out a form, submit it, pay your money, and leave. Wouldn't it be easier, more convenient, flexible if you could do that online? If you could do it regardless of the money you'd been making, if you're a seasonal person, regardless of the sums you've been making, you could pay what you afford. You could afford at that moment, whether it's a little bit or a lot. And the system just took care of the rest. It calculated your weeks. It sent you a statement periodically to tell you exactly where you were. Well, that is actually what we're doing. That project has already started. The first set of milestones are being hit this month, which, on my understanding, let you pay in any amount you wish, and it's recorded. And over time, between now and the end of the year, the whole system gets put in place so that you could pay remotely on your phone, possibly via EasyPay or another system. You can get your statements on demand or sent out automatically, and so you will know where you are. And you can consult, you can pay in at your convenience. It should be possible to make overpayments if you can do that. And it should also be possible to take payment holidays given that you're making overpayments. So the goal is to increase the ease, increase the convenience of participating in the system. And the concurrent goal is to educate people as to what are these benefits that I'm getting, or what exactly are they, or why am I paying this money? So that's part of the communication effort, but we have to make it easy to participate.
Tell me about some of those benefits.
Well, some of the benefits are what you expect from a mature social insurance organization. And here I'm combining what you might get as an employee also with what you might get as a self-employed person, because they're comparable, they're not identical. So for example, if you're a fully employed person working for someone else's company, maternity benefit, sickness benefit, unemployment benefit if you're laid off, employment injury, so on and so forth. So all the details of the package, the suite of measures that are there, you can see on the NIS's website. They're explained in great detail. And on the self-employed side, things like employment injury have been added, so they are more comparable to what you would expect as an employee, although they're not quite the same. So I advise viewers to go and look exactly at what's there, what they're getting for their money when they pay in their contribution. It's very important to understand.
One of the concerns raised by the younger generation especially is that they fear there'll be nothing left for them.
Well, perhaps that's based on a misunderstanding of how the system works, because the whole system is those who are working contribute for those who are already retiring. The only way there can be nothing there is if people really say, I don't want to do this anymore, and the system changes, or they opt out en masse. Now, I have heard people saying, it's too much, I want to opt out. So the too much we kind of covered before when I wanted to make clear that for what you pay, it's important to realize what you're getting. The guaranteed minimum pension. If you're at a lower income, you will not find a better return on investment than what our pension, our minimum guaranteed pension represents. I challenge anybody to come and give me figures that disprove that. But the broader problem, if you're thinking to yourself, I could do this better myself, I want to opt out, I want to take my 17.1% if I'm self-employed and go and do it myself. I would tell you, even if you're an investment professional, you would find it very, very hard, first of all, to put aside sufficient money such that in 35 years or whenever you come to retire, you have a nest egg big enough to know how to treat it. First of all, what are you going to buy an annuity? There's no guarantee when the time comes that financial markets will be in your favor and that you could take this money and make an investment in an annuity, the equivalent of a pension that takes care of you. If you're not going to do that, how fast should you draw down all your savings? Do you know how long you're going to live? You don't even know when you're going to die. Suppose you spend too fast. What are you going to do then? The NIS system takes care of that. By all means, supplement the guarantee of the NIS system, but think carefully through the proposition that I want to opt out. I could do it better myself, because there's not a single study I've seen that shows that people who want to do that are successful. It's almost systematically the case that they invest too conservatively, that they don't understand the risk when they come to retirement, how long they're going to live, and so on and so forth. Investing is a professional activity. It's not something you do as a hobby and hope it all comes right. This is why you should rely on a system that's there to guarantee you the minimum of social protection, be it the benefits or the pension. If you are able to set aside money to supplement that, all the better. But understand the system that we're talking about before saying I want to opt out.
For the younger demographic, it feels as if the goalpost is constantly changing, moving from 65 to 67, now 68.
I think it's a fair observation, but how are these goalposts moving? Earlier, I'm not sure if it was with you, but I have discussed what the conditions were in 1967. We knew then that an average woman had nearly 4 children in her productive years. Today, it's less than 2. We knew that the economy was growing at nearly 7% every single year. It hasn't grown at even 1% on average for the last 15 years. And we knew that people tended to die a lot earlier. I think the life expectancy was around 67, 68 in 1967. And today it's about 78. And it looks from some of the data that I've seen that it's even more than that. So circumstances do change. If we want to say goalposts have been moved, they have been moved by fate. All the things that have helped us socially, for example, increase in life expectancy. If you're a woman, the legislation that's been passed around family planning that doesn't bind you to the home raising children, you can have an independent career, we still have a ways to go on that. These are gains that have impacted the way things stand today as compared to how they stood in 1967. So sure, the goalposts have changed, but they've changed for the good, the better, as well as for the worse in this particular circumstance when it comes to the retirement age. I don't think it's the case that you can say an administration has moved the goalposts. The administration, be it this one, past one, or a future one, has to evolve along with the times that it's in. It's as simple as that.
My final question is regarding projections. What are the current projections under these measures?
If you recall, if we do nothing, and you'll read the actuarial's last report, the fund is depleted in 2036 on his best estimate. What that would mean is not the end of the NIS, but it would mean that the affordability is passed on in full to contributors, because at the moment the fund is effectively subsidizing what we pay. And that rate would have to rise probably above 27%. You don't even want to countenance that. That is not something that can be permitted. With these measures, the suite of measures that balance benefit adequacy, affordability, and fund sustainability, we project now, instead of 2036 being the date when the fund is depleted, it's pushed out to 2052. And the affordability is restrained within what it is today, which is about 24%, it will rise a point or two, but it actually starts to fall after 2050. And it's also important to bear in mind that those projections don't mean we're coming back here necessarily in 2052, because we're also in this package of measures putting in something called a compulsory adjustment mechanism that obliges the government to act when advised by the board and the actuary that we're off target. And the longer you wait, and this has been our problem in the past, the longer you wait to correct your course, the further you've gone off target. If you know straight away you're off target and you come back, less painful to actually achieve. So we have said, and it has been accepted, that the legislation must change to incorporate a trigger that the government uses to correct course. And correcting course might mean a small increase in the contribution rate. It might mean a cash injection by the government especially the trigger is the fund, especially if the fund starts to look weak. But something would have to be done. You can't just wait, as we waited for a long time, and do nothing. So I'm fairly confident once the public understand these measures, they have all the information in front of them, they will agree with us that we have found the right balance of adequacy, affordability, and sustainability.
Senator Adams, thank you for making the time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining me.